Well, all right. Welcome to the next to last evening for our discussion of the seven deadly sins here at St. Thomas Episcopal Church. We are looking this evening at the deadly sin of gluttony, which most of us, if not every single one of us, might think, well, that's not a one I have to worry about. But by the time we get to the end of it tonight, we're going to go, geez, man, that's the one I'm most guilty of. So, the Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Father, if it ever occurred to us that eating and drinking had anything much to do with your kingdom of grace, well, we long ago abandoned such beliefs. And so we find ourselves today without much discipline when it comes to food, and even less spiritual understanding of how we might eat and drink to your glory. We mostly laugh off the sin of gluttony as a problem others face, but deep down we realize we need help if we are to overcome our own issues with food and drink. So open our eyes and offer us the enabling strength of your grace. Amen. Well, all right. Thanks for coming. It's the sin of gluttony tonight. Knowing what the Greek word is going to do you absolutely no good because you've probably never heard of it and you know no word that is connected to it unless you're in the medical field. But the Latin word is gula, which is where we get our gullet and our swallow sound, and also the word glut, being overfilled or being sated completely. So it's a word that makes a lot of sense. If you hadn't thought about it, the devil's very first temptation of Jesus connects into gluttony. And in fact, this is the only sin that Jesus was ever actually said to have had. At least they accused him of having this particular sin. Remember the accusation? If you don't, then we'll get to it after a little while. The devil's first temptation was to feed your body instead of your soul. That's the reporting of the event on top, and it's the verse from the Old Testament that Jesus used to help himself overcome the devil's temptation. Presbyterian pastor, writer who actually just died a few months ago, Frederick Buechner, said this about gluttony. Which is just about enough to make each one of us recognize that we're in trouble for the rest of the night. Because that's pretty dadgum true. We started each of our evenings looking at Dante a little bit. He said that the penitential prayer of the gluttons in Purgatory was Psalm 51. Can you think of the verse that probably would have been used as a penitential prayer? Open our lips so that we may offer you praise. It's a good reminder that our mouths are designed for something more than just eating. Fra Angelica's painting of the Last Judgment just kind of looks like something you would expect for Last Judgment. Right down through the middle, the graves have all been opened up. And so it's being raised back to life for the judgment. The good folks are on the left. Bad folks are on the right. Good folks are being led away to make their way into the holy city, the New Jerusalem. The bad folks are being led into a hole into hell over on the right. And if you look really close, the good folks who have been raised to new life and are headed to the New Jerusalem are all holding hands with the persons in front of them and the persons in back of them. Even before they get to the New Jerusalem, they're already community. But the ones on the right They're not holding any hands. They're just looking out for themselves, and they're being herded toward hell by a bunch of demons. And while you can't really tell what's going on over there in hell, I'll help you. This is a larger version of hell. And what you begin to notice is that they are gradually being moved through an assembly line. And so by the time they get to this second one down on the left, they're beginning to eat each other as well as eat themselves, because they're gluttonous. And then over to the right of them, they're being force-fed, like pigs in the slop. And then go down a little bit further, they've been fattened up appropriately, and so now they are the food themselves for the demons. You see the big pot of them cooking, and then in the very bottom one, there's a demon ingesting them.
Yes.
So you might not have thought in a painting of the Last Judgment that you were going to get to see gluttony at work, but there you go. You do. I think that's a wonderful drawing of gluttony. This particular person's mouth has become pig-like, and the slop is even running out of it. But this person is definitely not using their mouth to proclaim your praise. In the Inferno, Dante's Inferno, the gluttonous persons who are in hell are all stuck in a big mudslime, stinky, vile mudslime, where they can't do anything other than just wallow in it. And while they're wallowing in it, the three-headed dog Kerberos is feasting on them. If they actually became penitential enough to be in purgatory, in the purgatory version of Dante's work, those folk are walking around absolutely famished in an orchard full of heavily laden fruit trees, which they cannot eat. Their punishment is to experience what they absolutely did not ever experience on earth: hunger and the famine that goes with it. Hieronymus Bosch, remember the eyeball is there up there in the middle, up above it. Here's his version of the sin of gluttony. Every single one of these persons is gluttonous, whether it is with food or drink. They're even using part of the floor of the home to cook more food. And there's even the children's defecation box to relieve themselves of food so they can get right back to the table more quickly. I think I was potty trained on one of those. It looked real similar to that. Well, all right. So in classical literature, both the Greeks and the Romans talked about gluttony as not so much overeating, but having a preoccupation with eating. Well, on the front end, you might think, well, it's the same thing. Well, not really. You can have a preoccupation with food and not be the least bit, quote unquote, overweight. You can be skinny as a rail and still be preoccupied with food. And that's where we're headed for most of the rest of the evening. So it's not just eating too much, it's being preoccupied with food and drink. I've heard this comment a few times. Probably it's one that is spoken at every church sooner or later. And I've also heard my younger self say this. You know, there are people who eat to live, and I'm probably more in that category, and there's other people that live to eat. Problem is, both of those can be sinful. So that brings us to our Kansas State gluttony maps. I chose this particular version of the map rather than the one that has the bright red, because this one you can just more or less see on a county by county basis which ones are really bad. And if you look real close, Washington County's got some real issues. But those of us who live in Benton County, we're okay. At least we were in 2009. And if that map is not quite good enough, this one is really strange. Because if you look up at Cook County, Illinois, it has no problems. Nor does Miami, Florida.
What was your basis on this one?
How many fast food joints there are per capita? There's just a whole lot of other eating places in Chicago that are not fast food joints, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
So this one offers you a different version of the same thing. And there you can see very quickly, really, where all of the major urban centers are. Well, so if nothing else, even here on the front end tonight, we should be seeing that it's not just the obese who have a problem with gluttony. Every single one of us may be, we're just sitting here with bated breath trying to figure out where we're going to fit in to the problem tonight. As I mentioned, it's not just the obese who have a problem with gluttony. Some of the people who have the worst problems with gluttony are the people who are having food taken off their plates. It's the rest of the world affected by gluttony in all of the ways that happens. Which, that offers a reminder that Dante talked about gluttony as one of the three sins of excessive love, where the love is you turn your back on the community and all your love is on yourself. It's excessive self-love. Well, okay, so there we are with gluttony. I don't care if you get to eat, I'm going to eat. I don't care if you get to drink, I'm going to drink. And all of the other versions that we'll be talking about as well throughout the evening. So with that, let's jump into Scripture. In the Old Testament, the word gluttony only shows up twice. It's a little surprising. All these words that James has been offering us, 200, 500, 6 trillion times, gluttony is only twice in the Old Testament. And both times, the word really, if we sort of update the meaning, it just means worthless. There's the two places right in the middle. They're both in Proverbs. I'll show those two verses in just a moment. One of them, gluttony creates poverty, and in the other, gluttony is producing disgrace, poor actions. So for the most part, if you want to have a biblical understanding, at least an Old Testament understanding of gluttony, you can't look for the word. You have to look for the context. Context provides a sense of gluttony. And so that's what these two down the bottom. Jacob making some stew that brother Esau is famished and wants. Or in the book of Numbers where the Hebrews are saying, we're famished, we need food. And so they eat so much quail that it's coming out their noses, remember? So here's the first one. Gluttony somehow or another ends up wasting resources. And there are lots of ways that it can end up wasting resources. Think back we don't talk this way so much anymore, but if we go back to Prohibition era or back behind Prohibition era into the temperance movement, one of the things that was often said about drunks is that, they get paid and every week, and when they get paid, what do? They run immediately to the bar and spend all their money at the bar, so by the time they get home, wife and kids have no money to live on for the next week. And next Friday, same thing. The drunk shows up at the bar and spends all of his money. And so the one who is the recipient of the problem of his waste is the rest of the family. They're the ones who have to pay the bill, so to speak. The closest that I could think of that we kind of still dealt with that sort of mentality was those of you who, probably every single one of you, watched the Andy Griffith Show, Mayberry RFD, the old Otis, the old town drunk. He at least showed up there, and they'd take care of him in the appropriate ways and toss him into prison all the time. Well, our streets are filled with drunks today too, but we've just put them out of mind. They're still there. We just don't address them anymore. We're blind to them for the most part. If, insofar as they are taken care of, it's some social agency that deals with them. We don't have to. Whereas Otis was taken care of by just about everybody in the town. And that was a way to be able to enable him to continue to live and have some honor in it as well. If you think back to the times when he would show up in that show, how they treated him and how he treated others. I can remember at least one episode where he even becomes a deputy along with Barney. So he was honored in that particular way. I'm not going to go off on this tangent, but our sort of whitewashing of that problem, which is still a problem for us today, except we think it's not our problem, whitewashing that doesn't make it go away. It just means we don't see it. There's all kinds of other things that we tend to whitewash and at least make go away, but they don't really. And I'm thinking of things like, getting rid of flags of certain types or memorials, statues of various kinds. Making them disappear doesn't change people's hearts, and it doesn't make what the implied problem is go away. It just means you no longer see it, and thus are no longer able to address it. It has the opportunity to just get worse than what it was when it was right there for us to have to see and deal with up front. The other Proverbs issue is in Proverbs 28:7. Here's where it turns disgraceful. I can remember my mom on a couple of occasions saying to me, "I raised you better than that." I don't know that I was becoming companions with gluttons, but I was at least disgracing my parents in such a way that they had to remind me what was and what was not appropriate. Then there was, as I mentioned, the Jacob and Esau passage, as well as the eating too much quail so that it ends up coming out your noses. And that gets us up to the New Testament, where exactly the same issue occurs. The word gluttony only shows up a couple of times in the entire New Testament. And in this particular occasion, it's actually the very same event, just recorded in two different Gospels. So it actually only shows up once in the entire New Testament. So again, in the New Testament, just as in the Old, to actually be able to deal with gluttony, you have to get away from looking at the word and look at context and see how it implies gluttonous activities. Well, here's the two places where Jesus is accused of this deadly sin. put up the Old Testament version of this accusation to give a bit of insight into what was frustrating the people when they made the accusation toward Jesus. By linking this accusation with the Old Testament version, you see that what they were really saying is, you're not doing what we want you to do. You're not obeying us. Well, that offers a completely different way to interpret those particular passages in the Gospels. I've told some of you, at least, that the very first church that I was involved, I often, early on while I was there, would preacher's the last in line anyway. So when I'd get there, I would just fill my plate up pretty full. I'm still in my 20s, and I can eat like a hog, and it doesn't affect me at all. So I would fill my plate, and one of the old geezers in the church, every time I'd do that, I'd walk past him, and in between bites, he'd say, "Need sideboards with that plate, son." And it took me a couple of years before I finally put two and two together and realized what he was telling me. From that point on, I quit filling my plate up quite so full. But there's another form of gluttony. And I put this particular one up as a reminder, certainly to me, but to all of us, that this particular deadly sin, just like each of the other ones we've been looking at, is not an opportunity to be able to go, "Ha, now I know what you're guilty of," but it's, okay, yeah, I've got some problems with that one too. So yeah, I've got some gluttony issues. Here's another one of the places where, within a context, there's a discussion about gluttony. What gluttony does is not only turn our mouths away from their real purpose, praising God, to just eating, but it even turns our minds away. It focuses completely on earth rather than focusing on God in heaven. And then there's 1 Corinthians chapter 6, which has a lot to say that can be addressed toward gluttony. What's in parentheses is what the Corinthian church was writing to Paul, and he's simply quoting out of their letter to him, and then you see his response. They write to him and say, "Well, I have the right to do anything." Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's going to be beneficial to you, and you can work your way through that, and then they get finally to well, it's just food for the stomach for food. If we were to write that today, we'd say, food schmoo. Who gives a flip about this? And Paul will then spend the rest of the chapter telling you why we'll do that. Get a few verses ahead of the food schmood thing. In 1 Corinthians 6:19, Paul will get to the place where he says, "Don't you know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit?" You have to look close at that one, but if you look long enough, you'll see where the front porch is. I think I've also told some of you that the year I graduated from high school, in the Church of the Nazarene, there once in every several years grand meeting at which all the poobahs come together and do their electing stuff, just like General Convention every 3 years, or in the UMC General Conference every 4. Well, their General Assembly was every 4 years or so. It was in Kansas City, so where I grew up at. And they had all of the teens helping out with the worship services every night at General Assembly. And on Sunday night, there was going to be a grand communion service, among other stuff. So grand communion service, we're helping out. We're ushers, passing plates and collecting all the money. And then we become the ushers for communion as well. Now, 20,000 plus people in H. Bartle Hall in Kansas City, there's no way we're going to be all streaming up to the front, to receive communion. So it is, as is often the case, say, in a Southern Baptist church and some others, where communion is distributed down the aisles. So that's what we're doing, except, there's 20,000 plus people there, and they don't want communion to take a few hours. And so they've given all of us teenagers 5-gallon white buckets. And we pass the 5-gallon white buckets down all of the rows of seats for people to pull out a little Mac communion set. The grape juice in the thing that looks like butter comes in at restaurants. So there's grape juice in the bottom, and then there's, some sliver of paper or something, and on top of that's a little round wafer covered by another thing that you have to peel back like the butter things. So, there's lots of elderly there going, how am I supposed to do this? And never mind the fact that I'm kind of there. I was telling Stephen, arthritis is getting in my thumbs, and I don't have grip anymore. And never mind that all the oils have left our fingers, and we can't even turn pages anymore, much less get hold of some little peel tab on this Mac Communionware thing. And even if we're lucky enough to actually peel it off, we've probably gone something like that, and the wafer goes flying like a little frisbee, or we open up the juice and it spills out. It was not a good thing. And then to make it all even worse, everybody has communion, and so then we get back our white buckets because there's mountains of trash everywhere that we have created, and so the bucket's picking up all the communion trash. Weren't good. I understand that there was almost a moment where we were going to use those during COVID, but it got vetoed. Thank goodness. But that's not something that just happens in communion services at churches that don't really think through some of these things very well. That was being done as an act of convenience, efficiency. Okay, that's great. But convenience and efficiency, there's nothing righteous or good about that. Convenience and efficiency is behind drive-thrus in fast food places. And so what ends up happening when you get all your junk in the fast food place quickly, sort of, and efficiently, is that you then have it in your car. And part of the convenience is that before you get home, you got all this trash, and so what do? You throw it out the window. And it becomes somebody else's problem. Convenience and efficiency are not necessarily at all good things. They cause even greater problems. So, in Christian theology, which begins to pull all this together, it becomes pretty clear very quickly that gluttony is not just a simple issue of obesity. It really is this obsession with food that I've been mentioning. An obsession with food. I love Arlo and Janice, a couple old hippies. I won't say that I've ever had this conversation with someone, but maybe I have. Well, maybe I'm the only one that has that issue. Greed was the deadly sin that dealt with possessions. Gluttony is the deadly sin that's going to deal with bodies, with the food and drink that goes into them. Another way to say that is that greed deals with owning things. Gluttony deals with eating up things, consuming things, so that there's less when we're done than there is when we begin. There's at least the same amount left with greed, but with gluttony, there's less. Traditionally, gluttony has often been paired up with drinking, with drunkenness, an overindulgence in intake. For some reason, I just really like that particular quote. But it's not just food, it's not just drink. You know, with food, if you overindulge, there's an issue with obesity. With drink, if you overindulge, there's alcoholism. If you overindulge with drugs, you've got addictions that you have to address and deal with. But actually, I think when we're talking specifically about gluttony, there's a different trinity of things we have to deal with. The Holy Trinity of gluttony is not food and drink and drugs. It's salt and butter and sugar. There is an unnamed resident in my house who, as long as I have known this person, has loudly proclaimed to anybody in the vicinity that you can never have too much butter. I shall not divulge who this person is. Well, that sets us up to be able to deal with all of these various forms of gluttony. And so, let's deal with these. We'll have another nice acronym that we can learn. Do you still remember the acronym for these deadly sins? No? PEGLAGS, yeah. And it stands for pride and envy and greed, lust, anger, gluttony, and there you go. So now you're going to learn a new one, fresh. Lets us know what Christian theologians have said about gluttony. As I said, it's not just a matter of obesity, it's well, just put a different word up there. Because probably nobody really knows what this word means. But it means that. Well, I don't even remember what they stand for now. Am I going to teach you what it stands for if I can't remember?
Just for making fun of my butter comment.
That's
Probably is. Probably is.
There you go.
I can't remember if this is actually the word, but it's close enough. That's what the theologians have said. Each one of those are forms of gluttony in us. Yeah, how about I put this word up instead? There we go. That's probably better. Okay, now we can move ahead. All right, so the first one, we can eat too fussily, with too much fuss. And what that really means is, you know, you may have even had a kid that was this way. You may have been this way, or you know people who are certainly this way. They're not going to eat any food that is off-brand. They ain't going to buy Walmart's version of green beans. It's got to be Del Monte or Green Giant. Can't be off-brand. And it's got to be cooked just right. If it's not cooked exactly the way you like it, well, you may not have known that until you piled it up on your plate. But now that you've got it on your plate and you took one bite, the eggs are a little runny, or they're a little hard, or it's a little spicy, or not quite spicy enough, and so it's not exactly like you want it, you're not going to eat it. You're just going to give it to the dogs or throw it in the trash. You're eating too fussily, too finicky about that. It's got to be exactly, or it might even be, I'm not going to eat a flat iron steak. It's got to be a filet. Can't even be a ribeye. It's got to be a filet. It's got to be the right cut. It's got to be exactly the right version of medium well. And if it's not, well, they send it back to the cook to get it right. I grew up, my dad, we didn't have a, what do they call the thing outside that you used to cook on? The grill. He didn't grill, but you know, gas stoves have got a grill down on the bottom. It's not a place where you store your pots and pans. There's a gas grill down there. Dad would make steaks every once in a blue moon for us. But Dad's version of steaks was little charcoals. When they were done, I mean, to say that they were well done doesn't quite cut it. I mean, it's just charred. So, you know, you can make a steak any way you like, and I think it's wonderful compared to those little charcoal briquettes that Dad fed me as a kid.
In Alma, there's a pickled watermelon rind plant.
Yeah.
They've been there for 50 years, whatever. And I was visiting an aunt in Dallas, and this Dallasite was standing in line looking at old plantation pickled watermelon rinds, and then Del Monte.
Mm-hmm.
And the Del Monte was selling for like $7 or $8. And the other ones from Alma were going for about 50 cents.
Yeah.
And they were explaining to the kids why there's a difference.
Yeah. And you did not explain to them that
It came out of the same
thing, just put different labels on them. Yeah. It's exactly that same way in most places.
You can tell them the Claire story about Jesus.
Oh, yeah. So Claire, bless her heart. Claire, if you're watching this, so she likes Cheez-Its. She can devour a box of Cheez-Its in about a day and a half, if that long. And then she's on to the next box. So our pantries would often be stuffed full of boxes of Cheez-Its for Claire. Well, at some point in time, I bought a Walmart version of Cheez-Its. You know, I don't know what they're called, but you know, they're as good as the others. But she wouldn't touch them because they weren't Cheez-Its. So we bought a box of Cheez-Its, and unbeknownst to her, I bought about 6 boxes of Walmart version of Cheez-Its. And when she would finish every night and go to bed, I'd fill the box back up with Walmart Cheez-Its. And she never quite figured out that this wasn't, who's that guy in the Old Testament where the prophet Elijah, the oil keeps coming for the old widow. Her box never did empty out, and she never caught on. And she was making some comment in the store with Patty. Next time they went to the store, Patty picked up a box of Walmart Cheez-Its, and Claire again said, "I'm not going to eat those. I just want Cheez-Its." At which point in time, Patty divulged what had been going on for the last several weeks.
Well, we did that study when I was a student at the University of Texas. We sat up outside a grocery store with peanut butter.
Yeah.
Store brand peanut butter and name brand peanut butter.
Yeah.
And, we had all the permutations, the store brand and the store bottle. But when you put the store brand and the name brand bottle, people preferred it
Yeah.
to the name brand and the store brand.
Pretty crazy. Well, that is fastidious gluttony. You're too finicky about the food that you will eat. And there's actually a story in the Old Testament. Eli's sons go in and start plucking out the food that's being broiled, that's being brought to the altar. So, funny that even fast food these days, I can't hardly tell you the last time I ate fast food, but one of the reasons I don't is, number one, because of the drive-through lines, but also because when you go to fast food, it is anything but fast food. I mean, I can remember as a kid that they used to have timers going, and if they didn't serve you in so many seconds, it got the people in trouble. Well, these days you got to be served in so many minutes, because one of the things that goes on at fast food is that it's all filled with special orders. You special order your fast food. So the name doesn't mean anything anymore. But gosh, if even fast foods have special orders, we know we're in some really deep trouble. Well, so then, this is too eager. You eat your food too eagerly. Maybe it's because she's the youngest child, but to pick on Claire again, since we've already picked on you one time, when she sits down to eat, she just does this and is done in almost no time. She eats ravenously. She gobbles her food. A person who eats ravenously is a food gobbler. They wolf it down. They shovel it in. All of the different metaphors that we use for that type of thing. And here Esau is an issue again. Famished, he runs in and wants some of that stew and is so eager to eat it that he lets go of his birthright to be able to receive it. And here's where the fast food becomes an issue again, because you no longer order the food really inside. Everybody goes through the drive-thrus. So in order to be able to get it so quickly, et cetera, here you are harming the air with your car running all the time, et cetera, and you wait longer in those stupid drive-through lines than you would have if you'd gone in the first place. I'm forgetting to show you some things, but I like buffets, but well, part of gluttony is, of course, the eating too much. It's not just too fast and too finicky, but also eating too much. If you go back in the book of Ezekiel, there is a description of what Sodom, of Sodom and Gomorrah, what their real problem was. And if you read that in Ezekiel, it says that they actually had three problems. The folks were arrogant, and they were unconcerned about the poor. But problem number three is that they were all overeating. It was gluttony that was their issue. So, too much fuss, too quickly, just too much, but then also too expensively, sumptuously. I'm not going to eat at that restaurant. It's got to be a 5-star restaurant, a 4-star restaurant. I'm not going to eat a ribeye. It's got to be a filet. Always ordering the most expensive thing on the menu. Now, I mean, if it's your kid and he or she's 15, well, yeah, it's understandable. But just in case any of you are concerned, if you ever invite me to go out and eat, I will not be ordering the most expensive thing on the menu, so you don't need to worry about that. It's this kind of conspicuous consumption that is just as gluttonous as anything else. It's a variety of being finicky. And it's not just food. I mean, that can extend to cooking ware. You got to have certain pots, but not these other pots. They cook the food the same way. To which the person goes, oh, but not really. If you have this pot, it'll cook it better. Again, a little too sumptuously here. Or table accessories. Can't be plastic. It's got to be whatever. And then finally, too soon, hastily. This refers to those of us who find ourselves always snacking. You can't wait for the mealtime. You got to go ahead and eat before mealtime. You may be fixing the turkey at Thanksgiving, and somebody comes over and starts picking slivers of the turkey before it ever gets to the table. Or it gets to the table, and people start eating before you even offer grace for the food. You can't wait. Or the constant grazing that occurs at times on food trays, or mindless eating. Another thing, just chewing and eating. Jonathan eating honey and getting in trouble for it is an Old Testament story that deals with this. So we have an obsession with food, but we're not thankful for it. We forget to offer grace. Here's Bruegel's engraving. Once again, you see the woman, oversized woman down in the bottom. Here, the animal that is with her, that signifies this particular deadly sin, she's astride, is a pig. Well, she and just about everybody else are engorging themselves. Those of you who know a little bit about Roman history, here's the retching going off over here so that you can go ahead and eat some more. The little demon over on the right bottom has eaten so much that he's completely torn itself apart, and they've stitched him back together, but he's continuing to eat anyway, and on through that entire engraving. It's amazing how much food gets thrown away. It's part of the gluttony issue. We don't even eat the food that we buy. I forget the statistics. So much food that we purchase doesn't even get to our tables. It rots in our grocery bags or in our refrigerators. It doesn't even get to the table. It is thrown away. Never mind all of the food that in the process of being transported from the fields where it is grown to the grocery stores to get to us rots, et cetera, et cetera. It's just amazing the gluttony that occurs through this whole process. Never mind things like, though of course they don't have these anymore. Do you remember the candy bars, the king size candy bars? They finally did get rid of those. But, you know, fast food, they've got the super-sized stuff that you can get, or the super-size things that you can buy. And the one that gets me are the potato chips. The single snack potato chip bags that are half the size of a regular potato chip bag, but it's a snack size. Well, it really is a snack for some people. They just eat and eat and eat. I can remember Dad for a while, before Mom put the whammy on him, he would sit down with a bag of potato chips beside him in the chair and just munch away. And she eventually stopped him from doing that, and he stopped eating potato chips, at least like that. So we have all these gastro aids that we use because of our gluttony. Do you realize that Tums makes 60 million bottles of Tums every year? That's 6 billion tablets. And these aren't Rolaids or all the off-brands. This is just Tums. 6 billion Tums tablets are produced every year in St. Louis still, for those of you who enjoy that great city. If you stacked all those on top of it, that'd be a stack 5,000 miles high every year that they make of Tums. Pretty amazing. So speaking of, this isn't Tums, but those of you who are old enough, you will potentially remember this.
I can't believe I ate that whole thing.
You ate it, Ralph.
I can't believe I ate that whole thing.
No, Ralph, I ate it.
I can't believe I ate that whole thing.
Take 2 Alka-Seltzer.
Alka-Seltzer neutralizes all the acid your stomach has churned out. For your upset stomach and headache, take Alka-Seltzer and feel better fast.
Did you drink your Alka-Seltzer?
The whole thing.
Yep. Or there's this one. Don't have to be quite as old to remember this one.
When you get nausea, heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, even diarrhea. Hey, there's Pepto-Bismol. Nausea, heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea.
Yay, Pepto-Bismol!
Nausea, heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea.
Yay, Pepto-Bismol!
Nausea, heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea.
Yay, Pepto-Bismol!
Now you know, Pepto treats 5 different stomach problems. You see, pink does more than you think.
Well, there's something almost perverse about enjoying indigestion commercials in the midst of our national gluttony. And one more little side note here, on a good line. None of this is to suggest that you can't eat or serve gourmet food. I mean, there are gourmet cooks, and they're good. Now, I'm not talking the guys on TV with their TV shows, but I mean, there are men and women who just have the ability to make incredible dishes. And not only make incredible dishes that look wonderful, but taste wonderful too. And that's a wonderful gift that they offer to the rest of us who, you know, we're lucky not to burn water when we boil it. And that's perfectly fine. There's nothing gluttonous at all about being that kind of a gourmet. But there's something that's not at all the same thing as the person who creates a dish and then, while you're trying to eat it, explains to you how they made every single aspect of that particular food that is now on the table, hogging the conversation so that you can't hardly even eat your food. You've got to talk about what's just been served to you. You can't have a conversation with the people around you because you're having a conversation with the cook who's explaining to you how he or she makes. That's not gourmet cooking, even if it's something good. The gourmet makes and then steps out and lets you enjoy. If any of you have watched the movie Babette's Feast, wonderful example. Babette, who makes this dish, this feast for a community of old folks who've never eaten anything that wasn't terribly bland, receive a meal that back home in a previous life would have cost a year's fortune, literally a fortune, to be able to have this dish presented to you. She just makes it and steps back to the kitchen while they eat the food. It's an amazing thing. Gourmet food is perfectly fine as long as you don't then hog the conversation and go into all the details about what you've done. I think that's what a foodie is, regardless of what they may say a foodie is. I think I must have some of these on a loop in here, so we're just going to have to move ahead, I guess. I can't verify that this is true, but I have read that it is. There is a Nigerian food custom where when a meal is served, the eldest child receives heaping amounts of food because he or she is the eldest child. That's what they get. That's their custom. But then all the other children in the family, if any of them finish their food before the eldest finishes his or her food, and he or she still happens to be hungry, they get to help themselves to whatever is on the eldest child's plate until their hunger is taken care of and sated. Which means that the eldest child in those Nigerian households learns from a very, very early age how to be communally responsible. They eat at the privilege of all of the lesser ones in the family. I think that's an incredible custom. Now, I'm glad my mom and dad didn't do that to me, but you know, it's a way to instruct and create something that is terribly important. James, I'm going a little long. I'm sorry about this. We've talked a lot about food, but it doesn't just stop with food. Food comes over, it starts beginning to fudge over into health food and just health itself. You can be just as gluttonous when it comes to dieting and exercise regimens as well. How many of us step on the scales every single day? You know, we're focused on that scale telling us a certain thing. And you know, it's not just junk food junkies who are focused on food, it's also health food fanatics who are focused on food in a way that becomes terribly unhealthy. Now, there are aspects of this that are perfectly fine, but there are people who count calories and carbohydrates and starches and proteins and check all of that stuff to degrees that are just almost ridiculous. They make great fuss over it. Way more fuss over all of that stuff than really is needed to be taken. And they're going to end up dying about the same age as everybody anyway, when all is said and done. Isn't there something just a little weird, if not perverse, that we want to buy foods that have taken away any nutritional content to them? Does that not seem strange when you stop to think about it? Why would you eat something that is all filled up with artificial fillers, chemical substitutes, and you name it? I mean, it should be real food. So this has led one person, I was reading a book in preparation for this, and this is what a particular person said about that. So we end up purposely choosing foods that have no calories, chewing things not meant to be swallowed, eating products that only look like food, and consuming substances that can't be digested, all in the name of eating healthy. And there are those who are really more faithful to an exercise regimen than they are to showing up in worship on Sundays. They might miss church, but they're going to miss their exercise regimen at the health club. There is a sense, I mean, exercise is a good thing, and most of us have done that all of our life, at some level or another, but there are those who exercise because they've got so much leisure in their life that they don't know what to do with it. So they fill it up with exercise, going to the gym. Not that there's anything wrong with going to the gym, but we'll have reason to come back to exercising next week when we're dealing with sloth. So I'm going to go light on the exercising tonight. And, there's a lot of folks that confuse dieting with fasting, that they take care of gluttony by dieting. Well, no, you don't. Most diets only increase gluttony because it's focusing you even more on calories and all the other stuff. Anybody remember Irma Bombeck? So, gluttony is one of these sins that, like each of these others that we've been looking at, it really begins to isolate you. Because what you're doing, you begin to do, or at least think you do, or in secret. You don't want everybody to watch you. But there's really, of course, in the end, really nothing that's very secret about gluttony. You can't hide the fact. And that's not just because our bodies become overweight, it's because of all these other things. The way we eat. Are we grazing all the time? Are we shoveling it in? Are we being finicky about how we eat, what we eat? Because when all is said and done, we're talking about a sin here, so you can't fix it with a pill. You can't deal with sins by taking a pill or putting on a special cream. You still got to do the hard work if you're going to address it and overcome it in time. I mean, it even extends to things like, I realize there are people who really do, but one can run with this, well, I've got special dietary needs. And then you can't end up going over to someone's house to eat or inviting other people over to your house because their special dietary needs keep them from being able to eat normal stuff. Now, I realize some people do really have medical issues, but not all of us do. We do that special dietary need thing. So, all right, gluttony detector. Have you got a preoccupation with food and drink in any of these ways? Not just eating too much, but some of the others. Do you find yourself often throwing away a lot of food that you buy? Do you never say grace at the table? You find yourself running from one diet to the next? Most of us are probably past that point in our life, but well, there is a remedy. And part of that remedy, James is going to tell us in just a moment. So you can head this way if you want to, James. We need to engage and have some temperance. Seek after that virtue that James is going to talk about here. But as well, this particular sin is wrapping us all into ourselves. So develop some outside interests. Both thing interests and people interests. Get out of yourself and involve yourself with others. Be thankful. It might be just as simple, just getting started, to remember to say grace, to say thank you to God for the food. Jews do a nice job of this. They not only thank God beforehand, but they say grace after they eat as well. And then fasting, which is not dieting, has a spiritual purpose to it. It's 4 ways to begin to address and deal with the issue of gluttony. Can't wait to hear what you say about temperance.
It's all going to be on Ben-Hur. Did everybody survive last week without a Ben-Hur?
They did not have a Ben-Hur episode to look at. All right.
Actually, you going long is never a problem. If you went short, that'd be the bigger problem. All right, temperance. Everyone's favorite, right? No real quiz, but I'm going to ask you about the virtues again. I need to think of that for the last one. See if I can somehow spell out a word, but the theological virtues. Shout them out.
Love of the sheriff.
Boom. And the cardinal one's a little bit trickier. 4 of them.
Fortitude,
Yeah.
temperance,
What Vaughn did last week, what was it?
Prudence.
Prudence. One more.
Justice.
Justice. You got it. Look at that. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't get this one. Like everywhere I looked, it was a little bit tricky, but so don't really know exactly how many times, but what are your thoughts on why I couldn't? Just out of curiosity. If I just look up how many times is temperance spoken in the Bible, and it's kind of all over the map. So why would you think that would be? Because this kind of applies to a lot of the other virtues, and the same thing with the vices. It's mostly because once we start actually looking through some of the scripture, it's got all kinds of different words that can actually be temperance. Some people immediately will think abstinence. Well, that could be. Sobriety, prohibition, self-control, moderation. I'm not familiar with that word. You used it. Teetotal?
Teetotaler.
That was one of them, and I left it off because I was like, I'm not even sure what that is. But the case in point is
all your life, right?
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of different versions of temperance through Scripture. If we look at Titus 2:11, that one's pretty plain. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation, training us to renounce ungodliness and to live self-controlled, upright lives. So again, you're like, well, they didn't use the word temperance, but that definitely is temperance. 2 Peter 16, exercising knowledge, self-control, steadfastness, godliness. Proverbs, again, this one's a little bit different. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. This is probably one of my favorites, James 1:19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Again, that's temperance. Judges, now therefore beware, I pray thee. Drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. Well, I mean, that's really more abstinence, but that is a version of temperance. 1 Peter, but in the end of all things is near, therefore be of sound mind, self-controlled, and sober in prayer. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Again, another one of anti-gluttony. Proverbs 25, hast thou found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient for thee, lest thou be filled and vomited. And then lastly, Galatians, this one again puts it in pretty good context. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law, and they that are Christ have crucified the flesh within. So again, temperance, moderation, particularly habitual moderation in regard to the indulgences that Vaughn was just talking about. Natural appetites and passions, restrained or moderate indulgence, such as temperance in eating. Again, though, it really does mean a lot more into that, what I found. And this one, I think Vaughn said that you did this one once at the Methodist Church, didn't you say? The temperance and prohibition. Everybody come on out. May 5th, 1884. All right. I know Vaughn said that this is the model of temperance, but anybody know who it is?
Carrie Nation.
Boom, Carrie Nation. Nation gained nationwide notoriety for her prohibitionist views and her habit of marching into saloons and attacking the bar furniture. And alcohol bottles with a hatchet. She was arrested approximately 30 times for her behavior, and before her death at the age of 65, she broadened her cause to include the abolition of baseball, tobacco, and political parties. During her time in Guthrie, the local women's temperance union refused to give her their support and denounced her behavior as acts of violence and lawlessness. So I don't know if I would really say temperance here. You can see the aftermath of one bar she got a hold of. And again, spending a little time in jail. She's got something good to read. So the tricky thing here is kind of defining terms. So again, just building on this, because as soon as I couldn't think of her name, but I was like, okay, hatchet lady, and then I was like, there it is. And so again, when we think about it, it still is boggling that the United States, not that long ago, had a constitutional amendment outlawing alcohol. And the movement made this happen was composed of a small group of ladies that believed alcohol to be one of the greatest evils known to man. And unfortunately, they mislabeled themselves as the temperance movement, when they probably should have called themselves the abstinence movement, would probably been a better fitting name. Through their efforts, everything from beer, wine, whiskey was declared completely illegal. It was short-lived, but it forever marred the name of temperance, a virtue we should all admire and pursue. The good news is temperance is not just about teetotaling and avoiding alcohol, nor is it about joyless consumption of food and drink, in small quantities. But what exactly is it? And again, the simplest definition of temperance is the virtue which moderates us in the inordinate desire for sensible pleasure, keeping it within the limits assigned by reason and faith. Before the fall, all of the physical senses were in complete harmony and controlled by reason. The first man never became compulsively obsessed with eating or sex or getting drunk, never got addicted to anything, and never experienced unhealthy cravings. But after sin entered the picture, all the physical senses, by nature good and healthy, were unleashed and were no longer controlled by reason. Our powers of self-mastery were lost, and we began to drift naturally to unhealthy excess, as Vaughn was talking about, in pursuit of physical pleasure. And again, just keep in mind, abstinence is a part of it, but the two are different. And I would say the easiest way, I think Seneca nailed it. Abstinence is definitely easier than temperance. So that's a good litmus test, I think. The virtue of temperance takes our wildly free senses and pulls them back into control, harnessing them within the reins of reason. When faced with the temptation of excessive physical pleasure, temperance allows us to keep from excess. In other words, the virtue enables us to enjoy a beer without getting drunk per se, or eat a piece of cake without eating the whole thing. And like all the virtues, temperance must be learned through practice and patience. While it may not sound like much fun, the only real way to become temperate is through prayer and a form of self-denial. And this doesn't mean flogging or anything like that. It would be better akin to a self-control, not beating yourself up. Self-denial, that might be a little bit too strong a word. I prefer the word. I think self-control sums it up pretty good. And kind of like Vaughn was talking, Americans are especially bad about this. We like all-you-can-eat buffets. We like big amounts of everything. Instead of a single hamburger, we want a triple cheeseburger loaded with bacon. And I saw one, I don't remember where it was, Wendy's or somewhere, and it was 3 meat patties, bacon, cheese, and it even had onion rings on it. And I'm like, whew. It's like, okay, that's pretty tough. And again, you'll see certain things like in New York when we were living there, the mayor, Bloomberg, I think it was, at the time, passed some kind of weird law where it was like you can't get the 44-ounce sodas. Right. You can get a bunch of small ones and then drink them, but stay away from that 44-ounce. So again, it's a little tricky to try to enforce temperance that way. But what is ironic about this is if we practice temperance and control ourselves, we usually find that we actually enjoy the things a lot more. Temperance will lead us to a new gratitude and satisfaction that we could never find through strictly indulgences. But 3, I thought, pretty practical ways to kind of drive the point home as far as just strictly temperance was, for one, take less than you want. And again, this isn't, it may not sound fun at first, but if you really want 3 scoops of ice cream, you're probably going to be happy with 1, maybe even 2. Savor it. Do this repeatedly, and you will begin to wonder why you ever needed more. And who knows, it can take a lot of different terms, but the term minimalism, is everybody familiar with that? It is interesting that before long, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're at your house, you just start accruing just all kinds of stuff. You're like, well, I'm going to get this painting. Well, do you want it? No, but I have an empty spot on my wall. And then you're like, well, okay. Once you start kind of minimizing that, usually that's more of the take less than you want. You'll really enjoy the 1 good picture instead of 10 that you're like, okay with. Again, Luke 14:8, when you're invited to a wedding feast, don't sit in the seat of honor. What if someone who is more distinguished than you also has been invited? That is a form of temperance, where it's not just a negation, it's actually a positive aspect. And again, tell yourself no more. The world constantly says you deserve it, indulge yourself, you've earned this. Was it Miller time? And you're entitled to the maximum amount of pleasure, but the next time you want to indulge yourself, just say no. And again, the point is not just a joyless self-denial, but rather a positive learning of self-control that will teach us to enjoy less more. And a good example, Gina and I a lot of times talk about how we would go somewhere on vacation and we just really enjoyed it. Well, then it got to the point where flights to New York, since we lived there for a couple of years, were pretty cheap. So we were just like, all right, summertime, let's go to New York. And then the things that were like, oh, let's go to the Met, let's go to this. It was more of a, hey, did we do the Met yet? Okay, check. And even though it's like, wait, we're doing this more, I'm not enjoying it as much. So that's really more what that point of it is. And again, get uncomfortable. Many of the saints have said that one of our biggest enemies of our spiritual lives is to love comfort too much. For example, if we want to lay in bed as long as possible, kind of like Vaughn was hitting on, usually this doesn't do anyone any good. And again, they may seem harmless. These little self-indulgences add up and increase our desire to choose the path of least resistance. Keep in mind the virtue in the vice tree, it just keeps leading one to another. We become intemperate, controlled by our desires instead of our reason. Obviously, the best way to overcome this gravitational pull toward ease is to push yourself into uncomfortable territory. Do some of the things that you don't like as you have the opportunity, just getting up immediately out of bed. Instead of hitting the snooze 10 times, which I usually do. This will exercise muscles of temperance, enabling you to choose the good and deny your appetites when you don't really feel like it. And again, this whole point, just kind of as a clarifier, is temperance is usually considered gloomy and kind of like practiced by those who don't really want to have any fun. But again, that's simply not true. When all of our appetites are controlled by reason and are working in harmony, we will find a new peace. We won't be controlled by restless cravings and desires as much, but instead do what we really want to, like serve God, rather than what our passions are telling us to do. And again, it is always easier if it's like, wait a minute, church, Razorback game, is Vaughn preaching? And it's temperance, or it's intemperance. So again, it definitely is not just abstinence. For Aquinas, temperance is the virtue that disposes us to proper balance, moderation, but it is not just directed to denying, suppressing, or repressing our desires, but to moderate them so that they truly lead us to what is good for us and others in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Temperance is not the enemy of pleasure, but rather the disposition to find pleasure in the right action at the right time in pursuit of truly good. All right, I didn't get Ben-Hur in, but I did get Charles Heston in again. All right, what's the big thing here? What's he got in his hand? Exactly. What's he going to do? Boom. But this wasn't just how many did our Jewish brothers and sisters turn the 10 into? Anybody know? Because, they finally said, well, what does it mean to murder? What does it mean to keep the Sabbath? So they had to keep adding little guardrails, and they just kept growing. Do we know how much they got to from 10?
Was it 600 something?
646.
We're really close.
663. 30 digits.
613.
613. So again, with the virtues and with temperance, this isn't wait a minute, okay, I only had half a piece of cake, so that's, no. It's more of an instilling. Like all virtues, temperance is guided by prudence, which Vaughn covered last week, and it's not possible to have an absolute rule for what or how much people should eat or drink. People's caloric intake is obviously going to vary, gender, body size, levels of physical activity, and so on and so forth. And everyone mostly knows temperance in eating and drinking. That's kind of a given. But what about a more proactive, like calmness in the face of anger? you're really angry, you're kind of controlling that. That too is temperance. According to Aquinas, anger can be good or bad, but how we react to a situation of anger is based on temperance. Aquinas uses the term mildness to describe the acquired tendency to moderate our anger. And in our day, this term seems more akin with timidness, but this is not what Aquinas had in mind at all. Perhaps even-temperedness would have been a better word, but the point here is to understand that temperance is a lot more than just abstinence, like we said. It's a positive, kind of like when we were looking at justice. All right, here's another quiz. This will be bonus points. Who's that?
Oh, it's Keith,
Michael Caine?
Keith Carradine, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're close. Caine. David Carradine is the actor, and the person he was playing here was Caine, Kwai Chang Caine, the famous Eastern, but made into a Western, where he's wandering around the Wild West. He's a Shaolin monk, kung fu expert, but he constantly avoids conflict at all costs. Again, this Aquinas would say that's temperance. He can definitely do something about it, but throughout the whole thing, like in this particular one, the girl asked if he knows about the war. She meant the Civil War, because at the time in the show it had just happened, and he says, I know about war. It's a word men use to clothe the nakedness of their actions, or of their killing. So again, that's, it's a little bit of a silly, but at the same time it kind of drives the point home. Similarly, it's not a very good picture, but anybody knows who that is?
I was like Jack Lemmon.
Well, that's kind of a bad
Charles
picture.
Smithson?
It's that's always a good guess. Jordan Peterson.
Oh, yeah.
Again, the famous. Again, just it's crazy. Even he says that from just telling people to make their bed and stand up straight, and then all of a sudden, he's got a huge following, and it's kind of interesting. He's not. I'm not even sure if he's Christian, but he goes through the Bible, and he says it's crazy that I'm in Canada and I give a study on the Bible, and it's like the whole auditoriums are full, and I'm like, they do know I'm just talking about the Bible, right? But I think he defines it very this kind of same thing with the David Carradine character. When we're looking at temperance, and he's looking at when they're talking about the meekness, and I think this is a good summary. A harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. Henceforth, temperance. Similarly, St. Teresa spoke of humility as a virtue of temperance being walking in truth, living in the truth of who we are as Christians. And this is obviously very much in keeping with Aquinas' thoughts. As human beings, we have a natural desire to achieve, each of us according to our gifts and opportunities, but that desire must be regulated by the constant recognition that every personal gift is really a gift of God. And it must be tempered too by an honest appraisal of our real capacities, even as we might appropriately strive to push our limits. So again, the virtue of temperance for Aquinas directs us to the proper coming together of desiring. Number 2, the use of our intellect. Number 3, right choosing. And these kind of all go together like a triangle. And fundamentally, it moves us to a proper balancing within ourselves so that we can be and function as human persons ought, precisely and distinctly as our authentically lived human nature directs. Temperance orders us from within so that we can act rightly outside of ourselves. It is the habitual tendency to seek the balance and inner tranquility which is central to living consistently in a manner truly worthy of the human person. So again, closing thoughts, what is a practical way to approach our neighbors, our church, family, the stranger as we're approaching Passover, Easter, in an attitude of temperance? Is it just a list of do's and don'ts? Being respectful, and let's say that our neighbor is an atheist, a Jew, Muslim, fill in the blank, is living temperately to say, well, that might be offensive. I'm not going to invite them to church. Well, that would be an abstinence, and that could be right in a given situation. Because you're practicing in that instance temperance, love, perhaps. But at the same time, going to invite them is equally a sign of love and temperance. So these are definitely a little bit, don't think of it as it's got to be this or that. Same thing is if you said, I'm going to go help my neighbor mow their lawn because they're sick with allergies. Well, yeah, that's absolutely a sign of love. So again, I would just encourage us, if nothing else, to think of temperance as well as the rest of the virtues, not just in a defensive type approach, again, the checklist of do's and don'ts, but also make sure we're seeing them as an offensive list of do's. Again, not to earn merit or praise, but just to live out the virtues that God has instilled in each of us. And again, easy words here: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance, all come together very well. And then Vaughn, I saw that he continued the St. Thomas virtue frescoes, so we are moving on to temperance here. And again, I try to look at these every time and then try to figure it out myself before I read it. Some of them I'm like, oh yeah, I see that. Others I'm like, I don't know what's going on. So this one, the virtue is the condition or quality of being temperate. Again, exercising moderation, self-restraint. And in Balma's depiction here, temperance is depicted as the ability to remain free of distraction and focused on a goal. A stoic woman walks amid a fantastic forest filled with strange beasts. Do any of them look familiar from Vaughn's presentation? They depict the vices of temptation that face us all. The grasshopper reclining on an anthill represents idleness. Calling to mind Aesop's fable of the grasshopper and the ant, it's seated in front of a television, which Balma considers a potential instrument of a wasted mind. The half-man, half-goat, traditionally offering wine, but instead here he offers a bag of drugs. The strange figure in the tree was inspired by the ancient siren, half woman and half bird, who sang seductive songs to lure sailors off course toward eventual destruction. Here, a rock music diva becomes a contemporary siren. Stay away from rock music. The monkey in the other trees accuses with a pointed finger, but is blindfolded as well, represents prejudice. The fox, dressed in the garb of a religious man, offers the olive branch of peace while concealing a dagger. He feigns virtue while symbolizing treachery and is a comment of the many wars that have been waged over religious differences. The pig, traditionally the symbol of gluttony, holds a globe covered with the byproducts of careless overconsumption. And again, in an open house in '94, different community members were invited out. Candace Knight, a City of Minneapolis scholarship recipient, spoke on this panel. Although the images of the past shown in this fresco of temperance are from long ago, the siren, the fox, Balma has shown us how current their symbolism really is. He seems to know that today's society is such a different one for our children. I've tried hard to teach my children, Brandon, Candace, and Joe, the simple meanings of right and wrong, the simple sentence, just say no, the simple lesson of respecting one's health and one's self. I do this with genuine and constant love and interest in their lives. Recently, Mrs. Knight sent another letter, sent me this letter. I was so moved, and I asked if I could add this to her previous comments about the panel. And then she gave her permission. I just thought I'd write you to give an update. October 1994, I spoke on behalf of my mother about the virtue of temperance. I now have my own child and a husband. I have graduated from St. Thomas, and I'm a law student at William College of Law and a part-time clerk at Minneapolis City Attorney's Office. I now fully understand what temperance is and can fully appreciate it. I remember speaking that day and saying great things about what I thought temperance was from the perspective of a 19-year-old college student. I just want you to know that truly I am that stoic woman walking amid the fantastic forest filled with strange beasts. In '98, I became the first college graduate of my family, and I conquered the distractions of poverty, the gangs, the drugs, the crime, to give a future to myself. my child and all the children in my family who look up to me here. And I was tempted millions of times to give up, but I refused. I was tempted by drugs and the underworld lifestyle, but I fought against all of these things, and I almost didn't make it. But now my feet are planted on firm ground, and I can say that I truly understand what temperance is about. That moment I spoke about temperance is forever burned in my conscience, and it may even be the reason why I fought so hard to get where I am today. So I kindly thank St. Thomas and whoever chose me to speak about temperance. One day I hope to be in a position to contribute to such a fine institute of higher learning. So again, hopefully that kind of brings it home. So you can see the pros, the cons, and just keeping that temperate. Hopefully you have a better appreciation of what temperance is not. And that pretty much gets us through one more week, right, Vaughn? All right.
You know, this Lenten season is going by in a hurry. They all go by faster every year, but we're almost to the end of this. So, you know, if you have been engaged in your self-examination, I would encourage you to continue to do so. If you have not been, well, you can start any time, and that's perfectly good. And I have been trying to keep up with this myself. After each one of our sessions, if you then take a look at what's being talked about, you'll go, oh, I remember that, and dogs, man, I remember that. So use these if you have not been. We're just about at the end of our time together. So next week, yeah, we'll be looking at sloth, the noontime demon, as well as fortitude, which will hopefully help us get past it. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.